Good evening, everybody. Today is May 7th, and this is a Moscow City regular council meeting. And with that, Ann is going to lead us in a pledge, folks. If you please rise with us.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ann. Before we go on into the agenda, I want to make an acknowledgement. We had a passing of a former council person, Linda Paul, who passed away on Sunday morning, April 29th, early. She was a counselor for 18 years in this city. I worked with Linda for a number of years on council right in here, as well as other commissions and different things throughout and over the years. And a couple of things I want to say about Linda. She was the champion of the underdog, and that was in the paper. And that's exactly right. Tom Trail had wrote a letter to the editor about that, and she very much was. Linda, to me personally, and this is something I told Garrett, and I was quoted in the paper, Linda to me was like having a sister you never really got along with, but you had high respect for her, and you worked things through, and you had a certain amount of love for her. And one thing about Linda Paul, I'll tell anybody, she never ever lied to me. Now, she told me things that I didn't want to hear from time to time, which was fine. And anybody in this room and watching this show this evening would attest to that themselves, because that's how Linda Paul was. But she was very, very truthful with me. And one thing that Linda and I had in common, and we talked about it frequently, was Harry S. Truman, because we both had the book on Plain Speaking Harry Truman, and it's a wonderful book. I still have it part of my library. And that guy was one of those people that he called it how it was. He was plain. He was an ordinary guy. And he did a lot of wonderful things, in my view, for the United States of America. But so there were some things that Linda and I did agree on. But she was a spirit and did a lot of good things throughout the years here in this city. So I just want to acknowledge her before we moved on, ladies and gentlemen. With that, I will move on to the next thing, which is the Bike Month Proclamation. A Bike Month, whereas, oh, geez. Sorry, everybody. Usually I have that shut off, and I forgot to. Bike Month Proclamation. Whereas National Bike Month began in May of 1956, and whereas bicycling has been an affordable, environmentally sound mode of transportation, excellent form of exercise, and fun recreation since the first pedaled propelled bicycle appeared in the 1860s. And whereas local government is committed to educating motorists and cyclists about the safe vehicle operations to reduce accidents, injuries, and fatalities. Whereas biking contributes to retail sales, tourism dollars, and planning, infrastructure, and policies that support community livability. And whereas bicycling reduces heart disease, obesity, diabetes, and hypertension, and improves mental health and cardiovascular fitness. And whereas Moscow supports the objectives of Let's Move, Safe Routes to School, Complete Streets, Fill the Racks, the Officer Newell Safety Fair, and more. And whereas our region is gaining favorable recognition for bicycle-friendly accommodations, including Moscow's Intermodal Transit Center, more convenient and functional bike racks, and a growing network of bicycle pedestrian trails. And whereas Bike to Work Day in Moscow is Friday, May 11th, 2018. Now, therefore, I, Bill Lambert, the mayor of the city of Moscow, do hereby proclaim May 2018 to be Bike Month in Moscow, and I urge everyone who can cycle to work, school, shopping, and errands, or simply for pleasure to improve health and find refreshment and invigoration to lessen adverse impacts on climate and to reduce transportation costs. And with that, we have Margaret Dibble and some other friends of biking. If you'd please come up, I'd love to give this to you. We're going to go right here. Get a picture. We move away from the window. Okay. Away from the window a little bit. Better. You're right in here close. We're all friends. Karen.
Yes, well, as the mayor has proclaimed, this is Bike Month here, and for many of us, Bike Month is every month, maybe somewhat less in the winter. But this is sort of kicks off the bicycling season here in Moscow. There are events going on, particularly when Fill the Racks is happening Wednesday, and this is where Safe Routes to School encourages children to ride their bicycles to school. So really watch out for them on Wednesday and every day, because we hope that they'll keep riding. And if you could come by our Bike to Work celebration Friday morning from 7 to 9. We'll be out there on our usual corner, 6th and Main, with coffee supplied by One World Cafe. Thank you very much. They've been with us from the beginning. And I hope you all see you out riding your bicycles. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. Okay, with that, ladies and gentlemen, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Brandy, you have the floor.
Yes, I would like to approve the consent agenda and minus item G, which I would like to move on to the regular agenda.
Okay, we
I would
got,
second that.
okay, a motion by Brandy and a second by Jim to approve the consent agenda as is, with the exception of item G that will be pulled and discussed. I'll start the roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, we'll move on. Okay, Brandy, you have the floor.
All right, so can I request that Les give a
Yep.
little background on item G to start
He's-
our discussion?
Les is well versed. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So he'd
Thank
be
you, I know, and I appreciate hearing Les's presentation at Public Works, but I know that many people didn't hear that, so thank you, Les, for going through this again.
Certainly welcome.
Hi, Les.
Good evening. So item G tonight is the 3rd Street Polk to Hayes Phase 2 Bid Results and Contract Award. Kind of an awkward title, but essentially it is the second phase of a reconstruction of 3rd Street, continuing the work that we started back in 2016, so 2 summers ago. This picture here shows you a little bit of an idea of what we're dealing with out there. Some deteriorating road section, originally starting at Hayes and working to the west about 4 blocks. We did start with a project 2 years ago, as I mentioned. So this would be the 3rd Street corridor here, East City Park, Hayes intersection, all the way to Howard and Polk. So 2 years ago, we reconstructed starting with and including the Hayes Street intersection, and then came over to that line right about there, which is just west of Monroe, so just west of the park. So that was rebuilt. One of the reasons that we didn't rebuild the rest of it at the time was because as part of this process and as part of our overall capital management plan, we are including the installation of a 24-inch water line through this corridor. And that's to increase water circulation from the west side of town, where the pumps are located, to the east side of town, where some of our larger storage reservoirs are located. So this is something that's in our overall capital management plan, specifically in the water comprehensive plan. And that individual item is quite expensive, and that was really the hindrance in terms of doing all of it at once 2 years ago. There's enough demands on the water system right now, we couldn't afford to do all of it. So we broke it into 2 pieces, skipped 1 year last year just to allow us to accumulate additional funding for the water. So this year, and the item that's before you right now, is the construction contract award to pick up from where we left off 2 years ago and then continue the next couple of blocks and finish just west of Polk Street. If you'll recall, last fall, we did a grind and inlay paving project starting just out here at Washington and went all the way up the hill, and that terminated at about that location just west of Polk Street. So that we terminated it in anticipation of the fact that we'd be rebuilding this section this summer. So with this project, we'll have new asphalt from Washington all the way to Hayes. That's all within a 2-year time frame. So that's what is before you this evening, is on this item, is that award to Cray Construction for the continuation of this project and the Phase 2 Third Street reconstruction. And just a couple other quick shots, because I forgot to move forward as we're talking. These were pictures from 2 years ago, just an idea of what it looks like a bit. This is in front of the park itself. Where we can, we're preserving the existing curb lines. Other places, they are replaced. The sidewalks are generally left alone with this project, and we are redoing all of the road base along with the water line and the sanitary sewer main and some under-street drainage facilities, essentially French drains, to help with some high water content areas right in this zone. So when it's done, of course, it all gets paved, and you've seen what we have out there the last couple of years since the first phase. So that's the extent of the contract portion of this item.
Well, Les, when do you expect this work to start on this project?
We don't have a contract schedule yet. Once we award contract, we would have a pre-construction meeting, but I would generally expect that we'd probably see them starting after school is out, if I remember correctly on this one, at the high school, the Moscow School District, and then continuing into summer.
Because
So
it'll take a while to do when we dig down
it's
deep.
it's
in the
a
place
several-month
warming.
job, right, right.
Les, there were questions about that there are bulb outs at the sidewalks at the intersections in this project, and there was some confusion about whether those went out into Third Street or were just on the side street. Can you clarify that for people?
Absolutely. So, the next portion, in anticipation of this, thank you, Ms. Sullivan, for your question that you forwarded to us from a citizen. Third Street Corridor Children Pedestrian Safety Improvements. Now, this is a project for which we have received grant funding. That's the $250,000 grant that we received earlier this year. And that is funding that goes towards pedestrian-related improvements within the Third Street corridor. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past. We have not spent a lot of time on the detail on it because we've been kind of sorting our way through it. But we'll walk through some of that this evening to help try to answer some of those questions. If you'll recall, within the Plan C of the corridor, overall corridor project, it included bicycle facilities and pedestrian facilities. This CPS, Child Pedestrian Safety grant, CPS grant is only specific to the pedestrian improvements. So the two-way separated bike lane program and all of that within that Plan C will not be funded through that CPS grant. But the things that are within the Plan C scenario that the council directed us to move forward with include things that will be funded. So such as the warning lights that will be on the school zone signs, both at the high school and at the elementary school speed zones. The raised pedestrian crosswalks that will be constructed in 3 locations. Of course, we're adding 4-way stop control at a couple of locations as well. Improvements to some of the street corners related to ADA ramps, and then the installation of sidewalks where they don't currently exist or where their location creates problems. The other piece, and the question that came to us, has to do with curb bulbs. And keeping in mind, when we applied for this grant, we were looking at a variety of different possible projects, if you will, and components that could be within that, depending on which scenario the council ultimately chose, A, B, or C. So this is a portion of our street map that shows 3rd Street running east-west here, essentially from Mountain View on this end over to Washington here. I've thrown on the bike network routes. So the green routes that you see are the easy designation routes. The dotted green is the greenway as it loops around the community. The blue cyan color here is an intermediate level route, and the black is the more difficult route as you're riding in traffic west of Washington. Then, a little bit hard to see, but those little green rectangles there at the east side of Adams, here on the east side of Monroe, and here on the west side of Cleveland are raised pedestrian walks. Those are eligible expenses under the CPS grant. Then we're going to be adding, as I mentioned, the 2 4-way stops at Hayes and onto the west and Blaine here by Lena Whitmore. And then we have identified locations where we would like to add curb bulbs primarily on the side streets, and we'll talk a little bit about why that is as we go through. But those are the general locations, essentially here at Jefferson, at Polk and Howard, west of the park, a little bit at Hayes at the four-way stop, also at Blaine at the four-way stop, and then we pick up again at Cleveland and Roosevelt. Keeping in mind what we're talking about is curb extensions or curb bulbs, so you've seen this before, but this is out of our multimodal transportation plan. Just talks about what curb extensions are, what they look like. Generally, it's where the curb line that's running along the street juts out into the street, typically out to a travel lane, whether it's bike or vehicle, and then wraps around the corner. The advantages associated with this are they improve the visibility of the pedestrian if they're adjacent to an area that has parked vehicles. So if you're a pedestrian that's standing back at the original curb line here and there's a parked vehicle here, the guy that's coming from this direction doesn't see you very well. So bringing them out to the edge of the travel lane, standing here makes visibility, line of sight much better for either a bicycle or a vehicle that's approaching that crosswalk. Shorter crosswalks are involved as well, so from a pedestrian perspective, especially with children or with seniors, having a shorter walk, less time you actually have to be in the crosswalk out there traversing those traffic lanes is beneficial. It also marks the end of the parking lane just a little more definitively, so we don't have people creeping up on intersections when they're trying to find a place to park. A couple examples within the city. Right now, this is by Lena Whitmore. Here's one adjacent to the end of a parking area, so you can see where the old curb line was here, and then it juts out, shortens this crosswalk. In the case we're talking about along 3rd Street, just imagine that this was 3rd Street right here, so this would be one of the side streets, and you would see this on a side street crossing. Okay? The reason we're looking at this, of course, is that there are limited areas available to us within 3rd Street, but we're trying to address all modes of transportation within the 3rd Street corridor with this work this summer. And so the pedestrian routes parallel to 3rd Street, if this is, again, our imaginary 3rd Street, would have shortened walks and improved visibility and all of those things that the curb extensions provide us. Just another view from the other direction. Again, imagine if that's 3rd Street, this was some side street, you would have a curb bulb perhaps here, one perhaps here. So that's kind of what they would look like in general. Now, specific locations, and these are kind of a mix of pictures here, but some of these are from our internal staff, our engineering staff that are working on the design of these right now. Some of these are actually from the construction drawings for the contract that's before you this evening. So this is and it's a work in progress, so we're not done with these yet. But this is an aerial that shows that kind of that layout. It's very busy at the Jefferson Street intersection. So here's the two-way bike lanes, westbound lane, center median, eastbound lane parking. Here we're looking at a curb extension that would be in this area. So it does come into 3rd Street a little bit to end that parking lane, and then wrapping around to a curb bulb on this side as well, to again lining up with that parking lane. Shortens this crosswalk, etc. Okay. Also one on this northeast quadrant doing the same thing, shortening this crosswalk. And you can see there's still 30 feet of width here, 30, I think 33.9 or 33, somewhere right in there on that one. So they're fairly wide in this case. They do get narrower as we head to smaller streets to the east. Okay, this one and the following, these are actually right out of the construction drawings for the contract that's before you this evening. This happens to be the intersection of Polk Street. In this case, we're looking at a curb bulb on the northwest corner. So here's 3rd. So northwest corner like this, and then one on the southwest corner here. Okay, and new sidewalk, new ADA ramps, meeting all the standards that are required. So that's what would happen at that location at Polk. The next one at Howard, again, within the current project we're talking about this evening. In this case, the curb bulb on the northwest corner lines up with parking, which is on the west side of the street. But as you cross 3rd, the parking shifts to the east side, so then the curb bulb on the south is on the southeast corner. Okay? And again, new sidewalks, new ramps all through there. Continue on across to Hayes. Again, this would be a 4-way stop. But there is parking along this westerly edge here, so we felt it would be appropriate to place a curb bulb here to shorten this crosswalk. A little bit of a transition up here just to bring the cars into line with that southbound lane. So only the one portion, 1/8 of the intersection, if you will, in that location. At Blaine, this one was in Plan C originally, which is on the northwest quadrant to shorten the walk here. And then we're proposing to add this one on the southwest quadrant because there's parking to the south. So you're getting an idea of the theme here, is that where there's parking on a side street, and in select locations anyway, we're looking to do this, again, to reduce the overall travel time for students in particular, but all pedestrians along the 3rd Street corridor itself. This one's at Cleveland, where we actually have a raised pedestrian crosswalk that's going to be installed. Here we're doing what we're calling a double bulb or double extension. So to the end of the 3rd Street because there's parking, and out into Cleveland because there's parking here. So again, shortens it all, does narrow the throat a bit, and narrows it here. And the last one there at Roosevelt, again, a double on the southwest quadrant, same setup, parking to the south and west, and parking to the north, so one in the northwest quadrant. So that's all the locations. They were contemplated really at these locations as part of the CPS grant application. And the thought behind it all was that we're trying to look again at the overall corridor, all modes of transportation. Child pedestrian safety grants are meant to address pedestrians, and that primarily puts you on crosswalks or street crossings. So these locations we felt were pretty good in terms of trying to meet the needs. There are some that perhaps don't see high volumes of pedestrians, but again, you're looking along the 3rd Street corridor itself, and we're seeing a lot of pedestrians there. So as you continue up and down the corridor, that's what this would serve. So any questions about that?
Any questions for Les?
Thank you very much for that very complete,
Thorough.
yeah,
Very thorough.
excellent explanation. With the pictures help a lot, I think.
Yeah, that was great, and actually, I think that I picked up something from that I didn't get the last time, the locations, one of the biggest criterion was where there would be that parking, so that you improve the sight for those vehicles pulling out to the pedestrians. Is that one of the
Yes.
biggest criteria?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
And I have one other, question. When you went through the stop signs and the raised crosswalks, there are also the medians that were planned for in Plan C.
So you see one of them here.
Yeah,
I will tell you that just today, this afternoon, about 4 hours ago, we received our Alta consultants draft report that we've been waiting for about the corridor assessment. They have some suggestions on an alternative layout here, so we'll be looking at that, be coming back with a report to the council about what that may entail. But yes, that would be the first one there, located at Jefferson. That's the configuration that's consistent with what we had proposed originally in Plan C. And then the last one, actually, I think shows up, yeah, it would be right here, actually, just to the east of the Roosevelt intersection. Originally, that was going to be further east, but with some driveways, we didn't want to hinder people getting in and out of their driveways either side of the bridge, and so we shifted the location westerly within that block to the intersection here, where it doesn't have that type of an impact.
and do any of these more minor, like the locations of the bulb outs, for example, can they go through Transportation Commission for their input too as this progresses? Because I know there are many more planned in these locations that it seems like you have very good reasons for selecting those locations. Would it be appropriate for the Transportation Commission to take a look at them too as this proceeds?
I suppose that's an option. We typically don't take design detail level questions to a commission.
Well, this
Usually we're,
this Alta that's our consulting firm is going to be consulting, is going to have that information as well that they're going to be going through and reporting back to this council, right?
yeah, well, really what they're looking at is the implementation of Plan C.
Yeah, and that has Plan C, had the bulbs in it.
Plan C, as was presented, had just a couple. It didn't have all the side street bulbs. At that point, we didn't know what all was going to be included in the CPS grant.
Okay.
But I guess to finish, we don't typically take, this level of design detail through a commission. They're generally looking at a little bit bigger picture, if you
Gary?
will.
That was never the intent of the Transportation Commission. Transportation was supposed to be recommendation, review, design things were things that were done in the engineering department and brought through to council. So that would be an expansion of the commission's mission.
Thank you, Gary.
Any other questions?
You know, one more. I'm sorry.
Hi, yes,
So
hi.
with the, thank you. All the parts with the childhood pedestrian grant of the $250,000, and has it been determined yet how much of that will be needed for those other elements that are a part of Plan C, that grant funding that can be used for, and how many bulbs are left in that budget? Or is that something that is kind of gradually being determined as each project is proceeding?
It's essentially being determined. I mean, we have a general cost estimate for the child pedestrian safety grant application and all the components that are within that. That cost estimate did include the bike facilities, okay, as part of essentially the local match piece of the grant, if you will. And so we're looking at, the entire package, how much of the CPS money will end up actually going to the curb bulb versus the sidewalk versus the raised pedestrian ramp. We haven't broken that down yet.
Right, and I think it's great if there's the additional funding to do these extra pedestrian improvements on those side streets. I would just hope that the priority of what's been established in Plan C for those pedestrian improvements is a priority budget-wise and with.
Oh, yes, yeah, everything in
before
Plan
the
C is
additional bulb outs.
moving forward, pending, of course, the Alta study and further direction. But, yeah, all of that is proceeding, and then these added curb bulbs that came in with the CPS funding allow us to further enhance the pedestrian corridor.
Thank you.
Everybody good?
Mr. Mayor, with that, I would move that we go ahead and approve the bid results contract award as presented in the consent agenda.
Second?
Okay. We got a motion by Jim and a second by Catherine to go ahead and approve consent item IG out of consent. I'll start the roll of Brandy.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we'll move on to item number 2. Gary, you got any staff recognition report for us?
Nothing tonight, sir.
Thank you. I have no mayor appointments this evening, so we'll move on to item number 4, which is public comment. We allow 15 minutes for folks to talk about different things, as long as it's not on tonight's agenda and/or in front of Planning and Zoning or the Board of Adjustments. Please come up and tell us your concern. Give us your name and address if you would, please. Come right up to the podium.
I'm Karen Burnett, and I live in University Heights with my husband. And this week, I was reading the Moscow Daily News and came across the public notice to Moscow residents and about spraying. And I want to read it to you just to refresh what's in it, and then I need to ask questions because it doesn't answer all of my questions. Beginning on Tuesday, May 1st, 2018, Leland Lawn Services will be spraying weeds according to the City of Moscow Public Works Streets Division weed spraying contract. This spraying will continue throughout the spring and summer as needed. Spraying is a primary method of controlling noxious weeds. Herbicide is sprayed on selected streets, street cracks, and alleys along curb edges, in cracks where sidewalks abut curbs, around dead-end street barricades, bridges, guardrails, fire hydrants, on city rights-of-way. Chemicals to be used include, and I can't even pronounce some of these, Crovar 1, Banville, Transline, Telar, Surflan, R2, R900XC, Sahara Dimension, Vengeance, Plainview, Oust, Roundup, Rodeo, 24-D, Arsenal, Milestone, Escort, Gallery, Esplanade, and Edict. Now that's an awful lot of poison. Applications will include a wetting agent and drift retardant. Any resident who wishes to not have their street or curb edge sprayed in front of the residence and or adjacent alley and is willing to control weeds themselves may call or email Tammy Gray, and then her information here. to be included on the no spray list for the current season. And that's only the current season, so you'd have to renew it, I suppose. I'm not really much of a public speaker myself, but I do have a lot of questions, and so I thought I would just present the questions and just begin. I'm just beginning to collect information at this point, and I've surveyed my entire neighborhood today, getting their comments and their opinions about this. To begin with, the questions I have, number one, would be how do we find out what chemicals are being used if there are 21 listed, and for which weeds? And then, more to that point, do any of the chemicals mentioned in the weed spraying notice appear on the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's restricted use products list under pesticides and herbicides? If so, is the firm applying these chemicals certified by the EPA? I'd like to know that. An additional question. The city's notice says the weed control chemicals include those that are named. What other chemicals may be used? We don't know which chemicals are used for which weeds, and it's not really clear which weeds are actually harmful to our environment. Do we know how long these chemicals, and this is a lot of research that I'm asking for, remain on our properties, on our curbs, etc.? What are the long-term and short-term effects of these chemicals on humans, on pets, on wildlife? Do these chemicals ultimately wash into the city's sewer system and/or the water system? Do these chemicals contribute to air pollution in our community, and how much? I don't know who to turn to for all of these answers, but we really should answer these questions.
Mrs. Burnett, I'll help you out on a little bit of this. This is something
Okay.
that is done every year.
Mm-hmm.
In the various sprays, and I haven't got a clue. I'm pretty familiar with Roundup because I use that myself.
Yes.
But, Gary, would you, it'd be interesting, I mean, I know this comes before the Sustainable Environment Commission has in the past, as well as in front of us. What comments from Mrs. Burnett could you give? Because
Well,
if there's a series of questions,
Yeah,
perhaps.
there's a bunch of questions. Happy to
Perhaps
answer those.
what we'd like to do
I
is
didn't
have those.
expect you to have the answers right
No, but you
in the
can
session.
certainly get a written response to all of these things. There's no
Okay.
reason for you not to be able to have that, as well as anybody else in our town, as far as that goes.
Sure.
And yes, they're being applied by licensed applicators, and all of these are EPA approved. But certainly the particular questions we can address.
All right,
Used,
all right.
used to be for years, Scholl Brothers was the one that did it for us, and Joe and Debbie retired, and another firm, which is people that worked for them, took this firm over, Ms. Burnett. But could we get the submission of her
Sure.
questions and then get it wrote out for us?
Yeah, I'd be
so
happy to
she's
take
got
the
it?
questions and get back to you.
Have
Okay,
some
I would
point
appreciate
you wanna
that.
make, Kathy?
I introduced myself to Karen when
Yes.
she came up and asked why she was, coming tonight, and she said she was interested in these questions, and I said Sustainable Environment had been asking this too, and as liaison to Parks and Rec, I introduced her to David, and said that those questions in that department deal with this and have all that information, and then the two of them started to talk, because I know that the answers that the questions that you're asking, the Parks Department has those answers.
Actually, that's done by the street department.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, well, I guess what I'm trying to say is when we had the Parks and Recs Commission meetings and when Dwight talked about all this stuff, he talked about, so I was liaison a year ago. And, because this came up, what you're asking, and they have all that information there. I know they're applied there, but he talked about all of the, information that they had at the Parks Department.
And so-
maybe- I
so
don't
are
know
you
what
saying-
David said to you too, but David, would you like to say anything that you talked to Karen about?
Well, we're just getting started,
Well-
so there was
Yeah, I
there
just
was
felt
no
like there was a
factual
place to
information.
go. So I feel like what you're asking, has answers, I
Well,
guess.
the thing of it is Catherine, what Mrs. Burnett can do is give us those questions, because she's got a bunch of them, and we'll respond to them. And the point of entry is Gary over here, and Gary will follow up on it to make
Okay.
sure it's done.
Could I finish the list before I leave, though? I think they're important enough that we just need to all consider them. And I'm looking for some pretty detailed research, not just, a passage or something saying that they have been used elsewhere and no information available on their effects. Okay, I'll just finish reading if you don't mind, and that way I will have finished my agenda, and you can fill in whatever blanks
Well,
there
Mrs.
are.
Burnett, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a couple of more minutes, but if there are
Okay.
questions, we want a list of those questions from what you got there. and
Okay,
the
that's
answers.
all I'm asking, is just you, listen to the questions. Because I don't have the answers. Should we knowingly subject children, pets, the elderly, those with long-term health conditions, and various wildlife species that inhabit our community to poisonous substances? Are we unwittingly poisoning ourselves? What responsibility do we have for future generations? Do our children inherit an environment that is compromised and dangerous to life as we know it? I've spoken with most of my neighbors in University Heights, and not a single person was okay with the city spraying. They're all going to be calling you to ask you that you not spray in our community, our neighborhood. I have to assume that other neighbors feel the same when it comes to the health and safety of their families, pets, and wildlife, etc. I've raised several questions tonight and encourage you to find alternative solutions to whatever weed problems arise. For example, one possibility, instead of paying for the use of dangerous chemicals, why not hire college students, high school students, and others who need work to help with the weed control? It could be beneficial, and there are solutions for everybody in that sense. That's about all I have to present tonight, and I know that this is a difficult issue, and it's not answered very easily. I invite you to take a look at a National Resources Defense Council article that is online. If you go to 24-D, the most dangerous pesticide you've never heard of, it's one of the ones listed in this public notice to Moscow residents. And so that's a good starting place. Anyway, we need to look up each of these chemicals and see what their effects are before we apply them to our yards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Burnett.
And I didn't mean to step on your toes, Gary. It's just that question had come up at the Parks and Rec liaison meeting, and he had talked about that, and he had all that information, and that's just what I was trying to say to her.
Certainly, no problem at all.
Gary,
Just
would-
want to make sure, since it's through the street department, that their contractor is able to respond to what they can. So just trying to make sure she has the best information.
Would you hook up with Mrs. Burnett so we make sure we get the questions that she referred to us, and we get some answers back for her and her neighbors or anyone else is willing for it? Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody else want to come up and chat with us?
Joanne Benitez,
Good
203
evening,
South
Joanne.
Howard. Got to catch my breath. Well, I'm confused. I'm confused about the bulb out plan, which was presented by Les tonight as though it were a part of Plan C. I don't think any of you ever saw that before. The public didn't. The Transportation Commission didn't. So I'm confused as to what's design. What does that mean? How is that opposed to construction and a change in traffic pattern? And why doesn't it involve the Transportation Commission? I'd like answers to those things. And just one question is, some of the CPS money being used in this phase of 3rd Street improvement to build those bulb outs? Did that-
Sorry, did you ask, is some of the money, CPS money being used?
Okay.
That's your question. Is CPS money being used for the bulb outs? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. As I mentioned earlier, we have not defined all of that. There were bulb outs included within the CPS grant application,
Right.
along with the sidewalks, the raised walks, the medians, all of those things. So potentially, yes.
Potentially is. Well, if you're approving it, seems like you know how much was coming from where.
We do. We do, but we're
just not
looking.
saying.
We're looking at a total project cost. Some of that funding comes from CPS grants, some comes from city funds. We've not defined specific pieces within the project to say, you're funded with this money, you're funded with this money. It's just a pool right now.
I see. Well, just speaking as a community member and somebody who was living right off 3rd Street and has had to live through all the trauma of approving a bridge and knowing that the traffic is going to be increased on 3rd and working very hard in a very orderly way to develop calming methods, I would say that this is just one more surprise. Guess what? We're putting bulb outs all along the street here. People don't know about it. Some places they're needed. Some places, I would say, Polk and Howard, quiet streets that have stop signs right where you're putting the bulb outs, they're probably not necessary. Maybe, I don't know why these places were chosen. And I do think the entire plan should be public and people should know what's going on. I'm against government by surprise, I guess. So those were my questions. What's design? What's construction? When is the Transportation Commission involved? And when is the public involved? Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. One comment I'll make about bulb outs. Was not a surprise to me. Am I the only person that heard that we're going to have bulb outs on this Plan C? I thought it was part of the plan all along to have bulb outs. No, I don't know if we were specific about where we were putting them, but we talked about them as far as a calming device. I mean, that's been a discussion since day one, as far as I know. Les, you want to?
If I may, of course, there were 3 plans, and A and B relied heavily upon curb extensions within 3rd Street. Plan C really had very few within the 3rd Street section itself, just because of space limitations. Where you did hear about it was as we were talking about the CPS grant application process and the fact that we were also going to be looking at the pedestrian corridors themselves, and curb extensions were part of that package all the way along.
Okay. Thank you, Joanne.
Yeah, so that's good. It just has to be a discussion about the whole package.
Well, you know, the whole idea about the bulb outs is it's part of the calming device. They're better than not having them if you want to have slower traffic, if you want to have a meaningful way. And it's connotative because people see them when they go along. And, I mean, they're a smart thing to put in. So I think they're great. Catherine?
And maybe just refresh, how old is the application for the safety grant? When did that start? When it came to committee,
I believe the application was either, I can't remember if it was December or January.
It was December.
It was December, right.
been a
And so it's only been, that short length of time. And then we received notice of award, I believe, in March, if I remember correctly, early April.
just wanted to give a timeline to
Oh,
you.
I think that's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank
And
you.
again, if I may, the intent of the curb bulbs along 3rd Street is pedestrian safety, primarily for children. It's not necessarily intended, in this case, for traffic calming, because it's on the side street, but it's the pedestrian component that the CPS money is funding.
Okay. I've got time for one more if anybody else wants to come up. Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 5, which is Citizen Commission Report, Moscow Pathways and Commission David Schott, as well as Jonathan Graydon. Hello, Jonathan.
Howdy.
How are you?
Pretty well. Mayor, council, I'm going to get this up here on the screen real quick. And we are the Moscow Pathways Commission. We oversee bike walk pathways within the city limits. Work as kind of a fill the niche between transportation and Parks and Rec. Our budget's through Parks and Rec. They connect various parks and are a form of linear park in themselves, but they're also used for transportation purposes. And this is our annual presentation, so similar to last year and the years before. Mission statement, we promote and advise on the development of a path system in and around Moscow, embracing active transportation, recreation, and resource conservation enhancement. That's works pretty well with the bike month as well. And as of last year, we have a full commission, and we've kept all of our commissioners since then. And we have Brandy as our council liaison. She's been pretty cool. And David's our staff liaison, and we have a staff administrative specialist / secretary. Recent accomplishments for this year, we had, I believe, the largest turnout for our annual path tour this fall, and I know Mayor Lambert was there. Jim, were you there? You were there, Catherine. So there was a bunch of city and I think maybe even some county people. I know Tom Lamar was there the year before. And so we went around, saw the new path at the middle school, checked out the little pathway by Kiwanis Park and a few other places. And then we kind of highlighted some issues or places where we could improve the pathway and looking forward, and heard some responses from others. And for farmers market outreach, we had a few times we were at the farmers market, and I designed up a couple of new banners for these. These are vinyl banners, all weather, and looking forward, once we have new projects or new things completed, I can just redesign another one and we can get it printed for like $25-$30. So it's a lot easier than our former outreach method, the big display board. And we discussed some of the path road improvements at 6th Street. Les kind of fill this in on that. There's kind of that curb thing there near Patty's kitchen. And we also contributed some questions to the Parks and Rec Master Survey that will be going out, right? Okay. And then we also got new benches and the concrete pad and bike racks at Blackbird Station, which is across the road from East Side Marketplace. It'll be eventually be a full path station sort of for going out to Troy with a water fountain and trees and shade and flowers and everything. We're looking to get donations for that. We also had some students evaluate a underpass for US 95, because right now the pathway uses the Sweet Avenue crosswalk, and it's a little sketchy when you got people coming down the hill super quick, not sure if they're going to stop. So we are looking to see if we could potentially use the creekway there. Not totally sure on that. There are some issues with clearance and stuff, but we at least looked at that. We also gave some planning and feedback on the Idaho 8 Steiner White Avenue underpass, which I say there's an agenda item for that tonight for the budget, so that's exciting. Construction coming up. Looking ahead, our goals and aspirations. We want to become more active in pathway planning for new developments. For example, we were filled in on the Landy Lane developments just east of Orchard or west of Orchard on the north side of town. There's lots going to be subdivided. There's kind of a de facto path right now that the people have worn in that will be turned into an actual easement. We would like to become more active in that sort of thing because it's always easier to plan for pathways, especially
connecting cul-de-sacs or utilizing land features than it is to try to retrofit it after the development's done. And there are some new developments going in around the outskirts of town or edges of town, and that's going to be more important for developing that sort of stuff. As part of that, we want to develop some guidelines for community development and implementation so that we can hand off to community development or others just as kind of a part of the normal checklist for any new developments. So that way we can get our foot in the door early and be, hey, here's, do we have access for walking, biking? Do we have, especially like connecting each new development usually has a park or in lieu sort of park land donation. If we can connect that with a pathway, that would be awesome. Another thing we're going to be doing is continuing to research and propose some safety improvements at road crossings, especially Steiner, Blaine, and Altura's. Right now, those are pretty much unmarked. Like if you're driving through, you see the diamond pedestrian sign, but there's no crosswalk, there's no markings showing where that's at. And we've heard from several community members that that is a problem, especially Altura's, people turning off the highway and zipping through there. So if we can find ways to improve that as part of, and interfacing with transportation, of course, and things like that. Another thing, we want to do kind of a community party / outreach thing at Berman Creekside Park. Our commission member Becky Chastain's been looking at that, and then continuing to locate what we call orphan paths, like the little pathways that connect little cul-de-sacs or other areas, pedestrian rights of way, that sorts of things. And continuing to raise donations for Blackbird Station. It's pretty exciting when we got the benches and the bike racks, but we've got a lot of work to do. Running the water lines, some of the infrastructure like that, the actual fountain, there's going to be a bike repair station, and that'll be really valuable for people going out to Troy or coming back in from Troy. So yeah, that's kind of what we're been doing. Anything else?
Hey, thank you, Jonathan. Questions for Jonathan?
No, but I'm glad you're doing what you're doing, so keep going.
Keep right
Athletes
after
Commission.
Yeah, thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Jonathan. Good report. Okay, with that, we will move on to item number 6, which is Paradise Path Underpass and multimodal bid results. Les McDonald. Jonathan, hang around. You get a chance to listen to a couple of these things.
Yeah, she's just confused.
All right, good evening again. The next item is the Paradise Path Underpass that Jonathan was talking about a minute ago. Something that we've been working on for a while, and I think has been looked forward to for just as long, if not longer, actually, than we've been working on it. So we're glad to be at a point now where we're ready to start with construction. So what's before you this evening is the construction contract and award. And just to give you a quick rundown, you've seen this before, but just very briefly, this is the intersection of State Highway 8 and White Avenue off to the north, Steiner to the south. Here's the Paradise Path coming through. And we've often, over the years, heard lots of concerns about pedestrians getting across this intersection. And it's better than it used to be in that originally the edge of the highway was clear out here. When ITD rebuilt it a few years ago, they moved it up to this point. So it's not as wide, it's not as long a sprint as it used to be, but it is still an issue. A lot of traffic, a lot of turning movement, very congested area, very busy. I think we're in a 35-mile-an-hour zone at this point, so the speeds are starting to pick up on the highway. So there's been discussion for years about what can we do to improve the situation, and the answer in the end was this guy right here. This is Paradise Creek coming underneath State Highway 8. We're looking to the north, and the concept here is to take a spur off of the Paradise Path which is about where we're standing and taking this picture and running under this bridge, going under the highway using the existing structure. This was a project that has origins from multiple points going back in time, but one of the groups was students at U of I engineering program in their capstone studies, where they did an analysis, and I believe this particular exhibit came from their presentations that showed what it could look like. And we took that, ran with it, along with support from Transportation Commission and Pathway Commission and others, ultimately made applications for grant funding, which we were successful in obtaining, and have moved on then through the design process and all the way out to bid, which is where we are this evening. This is just a quick overview of the area that we're talking about. Again, State Highway 8, there's the intersection. Paradise Path runs right here. So we'll be picking up off of that with a spur going underneath the highway, comes back up onto the north side of White Avenue and runs as, I believe it's a 10-foot wide multi-use path all the way through the Blaine Street intersection and out to the entrance to the fairgrounds. Within the construction contract, there's a base bid, which gets us to Blaine Street and west, and an ad alternate, which is this piece from Blaine to the fairgrounds. The recommendation from staff is to award both the base bid and the ad alternate. What you see here in blue is an area that currently does not have sidewalk. Eventually, we anticipate constructing sidewalk, most likely with city funds over the next few years, hopefully to complete that. So we'll have a complete run, if you will, from the path, Paradise Path, all the way to Mountain View to the east. This is a shot of the front page on the construction drawings. They get interesting when you're dealing with grant funding and meeting ITD standards and all the rest. This is a shot of the planned view. Again, lots of detail here you can't read, but generally the planned view of how the path is going to come through underneath the bridge and back up. You'll see a couple things of interest. Here, we're actually going to be widening the path, the existing path to the south. And we're going to be widening from the 10-foot path here wider out towards the creek, right? The reason for that is U-turns, right? So if you're coming westbound here and you want to get onto the new system and make that hard U-turn and go back, you probably can't do it within the confines of the 10-foot path existing. So we give them a wider section here so you can make a bigger turn and make that U-turn going around. Same thing up here, the U-turn is actually onto the sidewalk coming back, okay? This widened section also sets us up well for a future launching point for a new bridge, pedestrian bicycle bridge across Paradise Creek onto Lynn, and Lynn is one of our bike routes to the north, all the way up to East City Park and beyond. So it sets up well for that location to be able to make that crossing at some point in the future. Just a quick profile there. You can see how the path drops down, goes underneath the bridge, which is up here, and then back up to surface. So there's a bit of grade in there. I can't quite make out, but it's less than 10%, but there's a little bit of grade dropping down and coming back up. And just a quick shot of the cross section. This is the bridge abutment on either end. There's the underside of the bridge itself. There's the road surface up there. So we will have a path that looks about like this, 10 feet wide. This is actually a modular block retaining wall here that will act as a rail and retain the fill here on which the path sits. And then the creek channel is in here. Now, keeping in mind, as we've discussed before, during high flow events, come probably late February, March, April, there will be times that the water is going to be up here. Okay? So we know that. We knew it going in. There's no way to design this thing high enough to stay out of the water all the time and still be able to avoid hitting your head on the bridge above you. All right, so we have some minimum heights here that we have to maintain, which then means there are certain days that this thing's going to be underwater, and that's okay. All right, so generally that's the project. We had a couple of bidders on this. The bid tabulation, I believe, is in your packet this evening, and the low bidder is Cray Construction. And I would answer any questions that you may have.
Questions for Les? It's kind of exciting. It's been a long time coming for this.
Mm-hmm. No questions, but I was there with the Pathways Commission back when we were first kicking this around, and People were hopeful but not overly optimistic that it would come off, but it has come off, and I'm glad to see it because it's going to be a great facility and do a good amount of linkage with the rest of the pathways within Moscow over to the Paradise Path, and I think it's a great boon to the community. Therefore, if
Here
nobody
we
else
go.
is going
Go
to
for
say
it.
anything,
Yep, waiting on it.
I would make a motion to accept the low bid from Craig Construction, award the contract in the amount of $421,720.50 for the base bid, plus add alternative number 1, bid and authorize staff approval for construction change orders in the amount not to exceed 10% of the contract amount.
Second.
Okay. We have a motion by Art and a second by Catherine to accept the low bid from Craig Construction, award the contract in the amount of $421,720.50 for the base bid, and add alternate number 1 bid and authorize staff approval for construction change orders in the amount not to exceed 10% of the contract amount. We all clear on that? Or start to roll with Brandy?
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
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 Okay, very good. We'll move forward with it. Thank you very much, Les.
Your Honor, if I could add as well, staff is currently putting together a proposal for a hydraulic study for underneath the Highway 95 bridge as well. So wanted to let you know that we're continuing to move forward with those projects for council consideration.
Actually, I'm looking forward to the day I can ride my bike, and I think Jim Boland's probably already rode under it, knowing Jim.
Well, you can ride under 95. There's a sandbar under there now that you can ride on in the summertime. It's, you can certainly walk under there, and when the Identity on Main project is finished, you can bet that most of the residents there will be walking under the bridge and not going to the light. So
Well, with that,
it'll be a no-brainer once that's finished.
I think that falls under the category of don't try this at home.
well, with that, we'll move on to item number 7, professional service agreement Paradise Path Underpass Construction Inspection. Les, you have the floor on this one as well.
Okay, thank you. So we've been working on this for a long time, getting ready to build this. Oh, wait a minute, I've done this one already. Okay. The second part of this evening is as part of the conditions of taking grant funding, you're meeting state requirements for construction and construction management and inspection. Part of those requirements are that you have certain certified folks out there doing inspection of these types of projects. And so to help us with that, we have before you a contract for construction inspection services proposal from JUB Engineers here in Moscow in the amount of $55,700 that would provide the inspection services that would supplement city staff in the management and inspection of this construction project.
Okay, questions for Les?
I have some questions for
Jim?
about this. So this is an add-on that was, when we've talked about all this project before, there was never, this expense of $55,000 was never talked about in any of the committee meetings or anything. It's like, well, we've passed the bid, but then we're adding this on after the fact. I'm concerned that this wasn't included in our discussions of this earlier, that we didn't know about this earlier. And also what JUB's authority is to rectify problems if in the course of their inspection they find something wrong. Do they have the authority to get the contractor to fix something or redo something that they find to be not up to standards? And also, what is their liability in terms of if they pass it, they say, we've inspected this and it's fine, and the sublayer collapses the next year, who pays for that? And the reason I'm asking that is because we built the aquatic center and somebody inspected the roof on that and didn't notice that the flashing was on upside down, and later on it cost us $50,000 to fix that. And apparently there was no recourse to whoever inspected that. There was no way to go back to recover from that, and it cost the taxpayers money. So in this instance, I just want to know what their responsibilities are, other than collecting $55,000.
Well, the intent here is that they would act as an extension of city staff. And so the way our contracts are set up with construction projects, the contractor is responsible to build it in accordance with the plans and specifications, regardless of any comments, direction, etc. from the inspector, right? They have to meet those requirements. And so if there's a design issue, that's something we would take up with the design firm, which is not JUB. It was a different firm in this case. If there are issues that JUB identifies in their role as inspectors on the site, they will talk with the contractor, but then they come to staff. And they tell us what they see. Then we, as the construction managers in engineering, would work with the contractor on how to remedy those situations. So they're acting as an extension. They're additional eyes and ears because we don't have the resources necessarily to do all the inspection of all the projects this year. So their role would be to be those eyes and ears, make sure that things are being constructed in accordance with the plans and specifications, point out anything that they feel is not being constructed in that manner, and also provide all the documentation demonstrating what they've reviewed, how it is in compliance or not in compliance. Now, I can't speak to what happened on the pool roof because it wasn't one of the projects I was familiar with. But I can tell you that in the projects that we've dealt with in Public Works and Engineering, the way our contracts are written, again, it falls back to the construction firm to meet the requirements of the design that is put out to bid. Again, if there are problems with the design, that's one matter, right? When it comes to inspection, if our consultant misses something, obviously that's a conversation we would have to have. But that's, it's a pretty typical practice for us. We've had a lot of projects over the last 5-6 years where we have had construction inspection or even construction management and inspection by consultants. The last big one being the Southwest Sewer Trunk Line, Phase 5 on 6th Street, which was a very complicated job, and they did a very good job for us, and it was JEB in that case as well.
Is it standard practice for LTAC to require a third party to be the inspector? Or could the city of Moscow do their own inspection?
It depends again on some of the grants, and some of them they have to be state certified and we are not. And others that is not the case. They also have certain requirements pertaining to who can do inspection and who can't in terms of who designed it versus who does inspection. On this particular one, you're right in that it did not get to committee because we didn't have this approved by LTAC in time for the last committee meeting. And so that's why you're now seeing it in front of council at this juncture.
Catherine's got a question.
I was going to say, if you look in the document on item 7 where it says acceptance of work, A through C, it explains what you're asking and what Les is paraphrasing, I think.
Yeah, I saw the documentation on there, but these other things are like, what's their liability if something doesn't work? If you pay somebody $55,000 to inspect something and then something gets missed, what's their liability?
I think it's a question you can ask in any job. Anytime there's an issue on a project, you have to figure out why. Is it a design issue? Is it a construction issue? Is it something an inspector should have picked up? Even if they don't pick it up, it's the contractor's responsibility to make sure it's done appropriately. There's lots of variations on how that scenario could play out. Really depends on the particular job and what issue might arise.
One thing I'll say about JEB, they've done other projects besides that 6th Street trunk line that you talked about for us and for others in the area, and have been pretty reputable about what they've done.
Yeah, I have no problem with their reputability or anything. It's just that this came to us at the
Right,
last.
exactly. Well, no,
after
it's
the
good.
fact, I thought I should ask some questions.
No, it's good
for
questions
public
to ask,
comment.
absolutely. Brandy.
It looks like it didn't go out for bid, and is there any reason for that?
For the inspection services?
Yes.
These are professional engineering services, and in the state of Idaho, you cannot bid professional services. That's all qualification-based. All you can do is go out for requests for qualifications if the project warrants that, and then you pick based on those qualifications, negotiate a contract and an amount. Yeah, there's no bidding in professional services.
Good question.
Okay, with that, I move to approve the professional services agreement with JB Engineering Incorporated in the amount not to exceed $55,700.
Second.
Okay, we got a motion by Catherine, a second by Art to approve the professional service agreement with JUB Engineers in an amount not to exceed $55,700. I'll start to roll with Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay. Move on to item number 8, which is Idaho Community Development Block Grant Agreement, Fire Engine. Gary Reedner,
Thank you, Your Honor.
it's about a fire engine.
Seems like it's the night for two agenda items. Earlier, under agenda number, or letter I of the consent agenda, you approved and ratified staff's actions in purchasing a new Pierce Saber fire engine pumper truck. That was done with a combination of funding, as you know, $362,000 we had accumulated, as well as a community development block grant in the amount of $289,000. Then we got notice that that was approved. I won't go back through item I again, since that is done, but we do have to jump through some hoops for the Department of Commerce in accepting the $289,000 community development block grant. What you have before you is a standardized contract. It was not included in the packet. We were waiting for Commerce to send it to us. It came in this morning. I immediately emailed it out to you. It's a standard CDBG contract put out by the Department of Commerce. We filled these out in the past. Very similar contracts for Friendship Square when we redid it. So we've had several of these throughout the years. So at any rate, it is a condition to receiving the $289,000 of CDBG funding. So I would ask that the council review and approve that contract so we can get it back down to Department of Commerce and thereby comply with the rest of their rules in order to get our $289,000 grant.
Questions for Gary?
I'm all in favor of getting a fire engine, so I move approval of the execution of the Idaho Community Development Block Grant Agreement for the award of $289,000 for the purchase of a fire engine.
Second.
Okay, motion by Art and a second by Jim to approve and execute the Idaho Communities Development Block Grant Agreement for the award of $289,000 for the purchase of a fire engine. Any questions? Start to roll with Brandy.
Aye.
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 Okay, we will move on to the next item, which is item number 9, authorization to proceed with the purchase of the Magyar building. Gary, you have the floor on this one as well.
Thank you, Your Honor. This was presented to Public Works Finance Committee last Monday. It is the potential purchase of the Magyar building, which is the current Moscow Water and Sewer office building located at the corner of Main and A Street. We entered into a lease with Magyar Investments in 2007 to lease that property for approximately $54,000 per year. It houses, as I indicated, our water and sewer office staff, as well as supervisors and the environmental services group. That building, when we first purchased, or when we first rented it, leased it, we had wanted to enter into a lease purchase agreement. The owner was not in a position that he wanted to proceed in that way. That first lease expired after a period of 6 years, and we've been on a year-to-year lease since that time. It is located directly east of our water operations, our well buildings at the corner of Jackson and A Street. So as far as location, it's in the perfect spot. So we approached the owner, Bob Magyar of Magyar Investments, pretty close to a year and a half ago, and asked him if he was willing to talk about purchasing the building. So it took quite a while to get around to it. We had appraisals done. Those appraisals acted as the basis of negotiation. The city did an appraisal, as did Mr. Magyar. We came to a price, made an offer. I believe it was last November, if my memory, my recollection is correct. He worked it, came back to us a little over right at a month ago with a counteroffer. That offer that we made was about $407,000. The offer that he has countered with is $422,214. As an adjunct to this, we also did a structural assessment of the building and found that it is structurally sound, although there is some beam work that needs to be done, as well as an HVAC system, carpets, that sort of thing that need to be replaced. The cost of those improvements is around $80,000. That has been taken into account in the purchase price, so it has been discounted to offset those costs. Source of this funding is the Water Department and Sewer Department's accumulations for the Public Works Complex building, which was to be located on Morton Street. Since that time, yes, Morton Street. Polk?
Van Buren.
Polk, Van Buren. Anyway, I always go by the east-west streets. At any rate, so we have accumulations for that. As you know, we did some scoping studies with a consultant on the Public Works Complex, came in quite a bit, estimated quite a bit higher than we could afford, so that accumulation could be used for other things. In this case, we will be offsetting the $54,000 a year rental, and we've done financial analysis. We should recoup our funds within about a 10-year period at current interest rates. So at the end of 10 years, we will have a building and have been in it an additional 10 years and would have used up 10 years worth of lease rates by that time. So it seems like a good deal, especially with the structural assessment, so that it is a sound building. It should serve us well into the future. So it's staff's recommendation that council approve the purchase. If that is the case, we will have the city attorney work with Mr. Magyar to do a purchase and sale agreement. Mayor can sign that, and we will purchase the building.
Questions for Gary?
Like
Randy?
how would we get going on the repairs as soon as possible rather than?
Yes, in this year's budget, FY19 budget, which takes effect October 1st, we've asked staff to bring forward a proposal to replace the HVAC system and begin work on the structural as well.
Okay, I move to approve purchase of the water and sewer office building from Magyar Investments Incorporated for the price of $422,214.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Catherine, a second by Ann to approve the purchase of the water and sewer office building from the Magyar Investments, Inc. for the price of $422,214. Let's start the roll with you, Ann.
Aye.
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 Okay, thank you, Gary. Okay, we'll move on to item number 10, which is strategic planning update by Jen Peffner. Good evening, Jen.
Yippee, paperwork.
Thank you. Yes, I thought it'd be nice to share paperwork. Thank you very much for having me this evening to talk about strategic planning. It's a pretty hefty PowerPoint when it comes to the amount of words on a page. So I thought having the hard copy would be helpful.
Got an extra
Is there
one,
one
Jen?
more?
You.
You have
Oh,
one
I've
more?
got plenty of extras over here. Okay, I thought I'd start with just a quick bit of history on our strategic plan. This is a process that we embarked on in 2014, had our first official strategic plan adopted in late 15, and have done several updates since. We're going to start off with some of our, what we call our major challenge areas. If you remember, we have external major challenge areas and internal. Our externals are those items that are really community-based, forward-facing, not particular to the organization itself, but to the community as a whole. So we'll go through some of these, and then, of course, each of these are housed within the departmental updates, which I'll walk through with you as well. And again, I apologize for all the words. It's just a really hard thing to convey without them. So. One of the biggest things we've looked at, our number one major challenge area, is deteriorating pavement conditions. And council has been very gracious in approving the adjusted funding amounts that we've looked at over the past 4 years. So from 2016, we started about 342,000 up to 815,000 for the city in 2018. And we are lucky enough to have ITD, or blessed enough to have ITD come in and help us with another 3.9 million. So we have a lot of city street projects last year. I think our current funding is at the 815 amount as well, give or take, I think 750 to 800, I think. But we're continuing that trend in the right direction. So for some of the administration type items, we'll talk about the two here and go a little bit out of order. We have declining enrollment at the University of Idaho, something that we've known that we can't directly impact, but that as a partner, we try to help them as best we can. One of the things we've done over the last year is I've actually been honored in participating in the strategic enrollment plan development at the university. They're undergoing a full strategic planning process themselves, focusing directly on enrollment. And then we also continue to partner with them on U of I recruitments, on community branding type things, and look forward to seeing how that works. I know recruitment's a big challenge for them and something they've been paying a lot of attention to lately as well. For our law enforcement radio infrastructure, this is an item that you've probably seen in police or fire or both at the same time. We're moving that officially into the information systems department. They're the ones that'll be assisting us with planning for that issue. Looking at grant funding, looking at long-term planning, some of those things that we can do and the deadlines that we're facing down the road. For Public Works, deteriorating wastewater collection system. Some of the tasks that have been completed to date include an inventory of the existing issues that we have and prioritization of replacement. Cost estimates and implementation plans are being developed. One thing I'm going to toss in here as we talk about Public Works is their plan is not an annual task or action that they work on and they make progress towards their goals and objectives. Theirs is a much longer timeline, takes a much longer view. So when we talk about things that they have completed, typically they're probably on track for that year. Maybe in some instances, some things have shifted as all departments will experience, but they're looking at a little bit longer view of things. So you'll see more of that as we go through the different pieces that we're talking about tonight. For declining revenue, jeopardizing service levels, one of the things we've done specifically is looking at a long-range plan for fleet and adjusting how we look at our fleet planning. Fire truck purchase is something we've changed the way that we typically fund those projects or those purchases. Street funding, working with ITD and trying to leverage those types of things. We also have the 2019 bond decision that we'll be proposing in the next year. And to date, no services or programs have been discontinued, and that was one of the things we're worried about as we see this declining revenue. What does it really jeopardize when it comes to service? So moving forward there. Economic development, we have several of those items throughout our major challenge areas, and really the development of the Partnership for Economic Prosperity has really helped us in addressing that, and that's happened in the past 18 months. They just launched their website, their revised website, and look forward to seeing the other projects that they'll be taking on. So Tier 2, these are important, but not as important as those Tier 1 items. Some of the things that we've looked at here, condition of cities' main highway entrances. Community development's been managing those to date and is shifting that to administration for future work as they've completed what they've set out to do. Lack of access to diverse business transportation infrastructure. Of course, the airport realignment is our #1 project in that area. Also looking at Highway 95 as we can support ITD in their reconfiguration and completion of that project. Aging downtown infrastructure, things have shifted a bit here. Initially, we had looked to include that project in a bond initiative for the downtown. Since we've shifted our bond approach or bond proposal, looking at a couple of things. One, community development block grant funding for those projects, specifically with the Legacy Crossing District, looking at the potential for Main Street to be included in that district. We're also, the MAC actually tomorrow is going to talk about the implementation of sculpture plinths on Main Street and how we can start to work to beautify our downtown Main Street area with sculptures. And that's part of their public art master plan as well. So those all tie together very nicely. Let's see here, aging storm drains. Maintenance procedures have been analyzed, projects are prioritized. This is, I think, a very typical series of events for Public Works, as we're inventory, prioritizing, cost analysis, and then implementation. So again, here with stormwater utility, that's somewhere down the line, but preparing as we can for that. Declining city water supply, alternative water supply Studies have been completed. PBAC has been a great partner in this particular issue. An analysis of options is currently underway. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the coming months. And again, this is a years-long project. This is not a year and done type project. So, and then our MPDES system, wastewater system, we've done the temperature reduction alternative studies. We're looking at from those studies what the findings are and how we can move forward with that. So. We've got a couple of fun ones here. So we've got fire or inadequate annual facility inspections. The biggest stride we've made toward this is a full-time fire inspector was hired in July of 2017. So Dan Ellenwood's been with us coming on a year in the next couple of months. So we're reevaluating what's really needed there and if additional resources are needed. Lack of backup power for drinking. Construction funding has been identified for proposal and consultant design is in progress. Farmers Market is currently unstable. This is one of my favorite ones. We recently went through this last year of strategic planning process with the Farmers Market Commission, and so we are retiring this particular issue, and we have 5 new ones that the Market Commission has come up with, which we gave an update on that last week, which for the commission, I think it was nice to see that progress had been made and that we were moving forward, and it was a nice little night. So. For administration, also very excited. The new website is complete. We'll continue to update and improve that as we go. We've also enhanced our social media approach. We started with Facebook when this issue was crafted, and we've included Instagram, Twitter, and some LinkedIn type things as well. We've also expanded our approach to social media. It's not just one person trying to be an authority on all things. It's spread amongst the city staff so that everybody can talk about the things that they know about and answer questions and engage. And we have one person that's really good at social media posting, and I'm pretty sure he doesn't want us to say his name, but we're really happy that he joins us in that endeavor. So Parks and Recreation, we've got our lack of a formalized urban forestry program. This is something that Parks and Rec has worked to address through classes and events in collaboration with the Tree Commission, and then looking at an arborist position. They look at that annually to see if it's something we can make happen. So our internal items, these are things that are very specific to the organization. The community wouldn't necessarily see much that's going on outside of this. In that it's facilities, or we'll talk a little bit about the bond. Those are types of things we'll need the community's support in tackling in the coming years. So law enforcement staffing, there is a request for additional funding proposed in the FY19 budget. This was also a great, one of the updates we had last year is a new detective, Eric, well, he's a current police officer, but Detective Eric Jurnis has joined us in the cybercrime investigation type things, and so has made some really good strides. I've got some better numbers on that in the PD section here in a minute. Our PD building continues, still vulnerable, still unsafe, still not a good fit for our police department. And of course, we'll propose that in a proposed bond election for 2019. And then as mentioned just a bit earlier with the purchase of the Magyar facility, our inadequate fleet facility, which ties in directly with our inadequate shop workspace. That's a shared facility for Parks and Public Works. Done some planning workshops, looked at some concepts, and funding came in a little bit higher than we thought it would. So looking at a phasing approach, or if there's any other plan that can be moved forward with that. So a little bit of a step back and revamp on that one. For Tier 2 information systems, they noted insufficient technology capacity to maintain service demands. Information systems is one of the groups that's looked at their current strategic plan and said, okay, we've made some really good strides in these types of things, but as we've gotten more experience with our strategic plan, how can we make the adjustments to be more flexible and to make it a better tool for us? So it's kind of, you get this tool and you figure out how to use it, and then you start adapting it so you can really put it to work for you. Information systems is in the middle of that process. We saw the Moscow Farmers Market, I think, worked really well for that process as well. Fire has also done a little bit of that. So we're looking at this as that living management document tool that we can use to move forward and not just be stuck in the same focus on the same issues. So as things come up and as we realize, okay, that's not an issue, that's something we do every day, let's adjust it accordingly so we can continue to move forward. So for instance, aging and deteriorating emergency fire apparatus. This is something that we've attacked, I think, probably in a shorter time frame than we anticipated originally, but have had really great luck in it. Only, our grant award is one item, but in our long-range financial planning as well. So we've got several initiatives going on that are helping to support our getting closer to these issues. High cost of aging equipment, going back with the long-range planning for fleet, looking at how do we do our funding decisions? Can we defer a purchase as long as we're accumulating funds if the unit's still in good working order? Just looking at a couple of different processes and approach to that. And then for back to fire again, looking at Station 2. And we've done some studies on what Fire Station 2 looks like. That's where we do have some residential facilities, and it's our primary training facility, looking at what it would take to get those, make those accommodations and address those issues in the coming years. So. Let's see. So administration, service growth demands are outpacing resources. Some of the things we've looked at is local funding initiatives such as grants and partnerships and collaborations. Simple things like a block party are really a good example. Working together, we all do a little bit and then come together and have a great event or a program or something that benefits more than one entity at the same time. Also looking at restructuring. How do we more efficiently manage our resources from people to any of our other things that we plan for there. Insufficient use of strategic planning. Just being able to come back to this tool, and I think it's a really, I'm really proud of the different departments and the work I've been able to do with them to say, okay, this is a good issue, this is something we're addressing, but we do this every day. This just is the job at this point. But we also see this is an actual issue now. So being able to refine and relook at plans, I think, has been one of the best things that we've seen throughout this update as people are moving forward with that and adopting the process to say, how can we make it best work for us to be a really helpful tool? And then for finance, we've had a lot of change in finance over the last year. So a little bit of staff turnover and restructuring, which is tied in very well with our service growth demands and how we're trying to address those types of things. But looking with some of the projects that they have going on, working with legal, who we've had a little bit of a transition there too. So those issues will be moving forward in the coming years. So here's our department breakdown, and this is where the words get very small, and I apologize for that. Let's see here. So inconsistent council and staff delegation. One of the things that we've gotten really good at is looking at standard operating procedures, primarily at a staff level at this point, to say, how do we address these things again and again so we're not spending time reinventing the wheel? And then how can we put some of those things into process for the council will be kind of the next step. So there's an understanding of what's happening and how that can go forward as efficiently as possible. Those insufficient revenues jeopardizing service levels. This is something we talk about with our legislature visits with the Association for Idaho Cities, talking about what happens at the state level and how it impacts us locally, trying to maintain that message and keeping on top of that with our different legislative options has been a high priority. We talked about service growth demands. I think everything else is on there is a major challenge area, so we've covered those. I will say one thing on the public information and community engagement. It's been nice with our website. We've seen our new listserv option for press releases, for instance, has gone from 128 to about 222 in about 3 weeks. So we've also got some good metrics on social media. For instance, Facebook, we're about 5 people away from hitting 5,000 followers. So some of those things have been really fun to watch, and you can actually see that what you're doing is actually having an impact. So. The arts department. As I mentioned, we had 2 issues in the arts department prior to this, and that was that our farmers market model was unsustainable, which we've addressed. I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then the arts department is looking at a revised plan for that department as well. It's the Arts Commission that's helping with that. So we're going through, and now that we've got the farmers market split out, looking at the community events division, the arts division can then say, okay, what's our capacity now? What can we really do? They've got some great programs in place, or I should say plans in place with the public art master plan. We've got our public art guidelines, so a lot of that structure is there. They did a review on their mission statement. They're going to have a really impressive history. They've got a couple of commission members working on that. And then our next steps will be taking some of that brainstorming information and looking, okay, what are the real issues that the commission's facing? They're in a really good place that their issues aren't nearly as terrifying as some of the others. They've got some real fun opportunities they can look at as well. So that'll be coming forth in the next few months. I think their goal is by the end of the year to have a strategic plan in place. So the farmers market, we had 5 issues that came out of that, and I'll go through these quickly. Advisory and operational expectations are unclear and lack boundaries. This is really trying to get commission and staff on the same page as to how everybody can do what they'd like to do and what they need to do to be as efficient as possible and get things done both at the market and as a policy visioning level for the commission as well. This really helped us get through that fee discussion that we looked at last year, which third on the list, inequitable and inefficient allocation and distribution of market costs. That was a very hefty project for them to take on, and I was really proud of the way both staff and the commission were able to just work through it piece by piece, and I think everybody was very satisfied at the end result. And it gives us a good foundation for moving forward with that. Integrity threatened by lack of clear policies. The vendor handbook was a project that was in the works for quite some time. Daniel Stewart did a really good job of bringing that forward, and we again have that basis to work on in the coming years. One of the things that we just submitted today is the market faces immediate and severe infrastructure needs, and market layout is unsafe. There's a farmers market promotion program grant, the FMPP grant, that we submitted this afternoon for looking at our current layout and potential future expansion plans. Some of those things about how can we, make adjustments to what we have now to work better than we have in the past, and then how do we know it's time to expand? Do we know if we should expand? But looking at some of those questions and having some professionals come in and help us on that. So fingers crossed we'll be able to move forward with that in the next couple of years. Community development also in a place where they'd like to look at, okay, what do we need to look at issues coming forward now that we've gotten kind of the strategic planning process and this method under our belt. Looking at highways, the highway entrances, that's one of the ones I noted would be switched to administration as we look forward to that. Aging downtown infrastructure, again, we noted that before, it was revised, it was going to be in the bond initiative. We've considered not including that in the bond initiative. Looking at block grants, looking at legacy crossing, including Main Street downtown, some of those types of things. Their planning and zoning services, they're two biggies towards the end there. The zoning code updates are scheduled, they're working through those processes, and I'm sure you'll see more on those. And then slow transition to digital record storage, that's something that's maybe not specific to community development, that's something we can address in information systems as they're looking at their revamp as well. So. Finance, again, with a bit of transition, they had about 4 major issues leading up to this. We've started looking at just brainstorming where we should go in the future. Long-range planning, internal auditing, those are two of the big ones. Some of the ones on the left side, for instance, the inequitable and non-compliant billing classification system, property owner's responsibility for utility billing, still issues, but there are more projects that we'll be able to work through. Looking at some of these more long-range issues is really what finance will be addressing as we move forward. As part of finance is sanitation, and we have insufficient expansion capacity at the Moscow Recycling Center. We're looking to address that in a 2019 bond, and you may have seen a survey that has gone out in the last couple of weeks for our sanitation master planning. It's about 6 pages, and it's a community survey looking to see what folks think about the recycling center amongst other sanitation issues. So we're gathering the information from the community on that so we can move forward with planning and as we get forward for that, or look forward to the 2019 bond initiative.
If I can add to that, I don't want anybody to get confused that the expansion at the recycling center has anything to do with the bond. The bond will not be spent on recycling center improvements. Those have been taken into account and have been accumulated within the sanitation fund.
Yeah.
So the bond relates actually to the proposed location of the new police facility on the current recycling center site.
Thank you very much. That's a very good point. Yes. So then in fire, we've looked at a few updates to fire. One, the fire truck emergency fire apparatus we're recommending that it should be retired due to long-range financial planning and recent grant activity. The other items that we're looking at, some of those are in the major challenge areas. Some of the other things that have been addressed is insufficient location of records and file storage. Maybe another good example of something that when we started our strategic planning seemed like a very insurmountable issue, but really was more of a long-term project. It's been approached as such. They've worked through getting that taken care of and are looking to retire that issue as well. So some of the other ones, the residential and training facilities, Station 2, some of those bigger items still make good sense. They've also added, I think it's the 3 on the right-hand side, specifically unclear expectations between the city and fire department, city fire department and Moscow Volunteer Fire Department, which we've been working with the volunteer fire department on a strategic planning initiative as well, and doing some fun things there to kind of take that organization and see what they want to do next. What are those real issues and challenges that they're facing, and where can we help them with that? EMS is one of the questions within, you'll see it in the volunteer fire department strategic planning, I believe, as well. Volunteer engagements, some things that are not unique to our volunteer fire department that other fire departments and volunteer agencies outside of fire as well are working through. So more to come on the volunteer fire department strategic plan side. And so for human resources, this is something that we're streamlining quite a bit. We have some issues that we're retiring, some of which are rolled into our updated issues as we look at where we can go in 2018. Specifically, HR functions, automation of HR tasks, and HR policies and standard operating procedures are a few of the big ones that we can easily see that need to be transitioned into the future issues. Lack of office space has been addressed. Again, it's one of those project type things that, especially on the third floor, we were able to address. And then also with organizational culture and some of those other things, there are perhaps issues that were specific to projects at the time and just we're trying to apply them now and they just don't make as much sense. So moving forward with some of the specific things, for instance, current medical benefit is unsustainable, lack of clarity and standardization of HR processes and procedures, and then limited automation of HR tasks, transactions, and records. Those are some of those things that we feel will need a little bit of time to address and warrant some decent focus in the next few years. Again, information systems, we've got updates for these here, and they're also looking at what their future issues are. One of the interesting things with this group is talking about this rapid changes in technology and how what was an issue 4 years ago is just now mainstay, things that have to be done regularly. One of the issues they talked about was not ever knowing what the next issue might be. That's one of the things that we'll talk about a little bit more with them. But as they did talk about their current issues, it was amazing how much discussion when we started talking about it, they were like, oh, yeah, well, we did this to take care of that, and we did this to take care of that. And so this list is actually quite a bit longer than what's noted here, and they've made some really good strides on all of these issues as they move forward. So it was exciting to say, oh, these issues don't work for us. And it's like, actually, you've addressed a lot of those issues, and now you can move on to something else, and we'll continue to work that out with them. Some of these things, the security challenges is one of the things, for instance, that will carry forward. That's something that they know is going to be an issue day in and day out, regardless of the technology that comes along. So more to come on information systems, but they're making some good headway on all the 4 issues that they have at this point. Parks and Recreation is another one looking to perhaps do some updating of their plan, but they've made some good strides in a lot of these areas. Really, they've been specific in using SurveyMonkey to gather customer input. They're doing registrations and tracking those types of things using online tools more. And really, they're at a point where they've done it for about a year now, and they want to go back and evaluate, okay, how is the SurveyMonkey working? Are we getting decent information? Are we then using that information? Same thing with social media. They've joined us. It's been about a year now, so they'll review, okay, what's working for us on social media, what do we need to tweak, how do we go from there? Inadequate shop workspace, that's the one we've talked about before, that's at MCA that we'll continue to pay attention to. Forestry program, and I believe it was the facility maintenance side where they'd like to do most of the updates on their strategic planning. Capturing the issues versus the projects was one of the issues, but also looking at how they can better build that plan to really provide some measurable actions for year to year. So those will be the big ones that I believe come forward from them. So and then the police, they've got some great access to data, and we're able to share a lot of that in this report, which is the thing we are moving towards, is including more data so we know that we're actually making progress in these things. For instance, increasing property crime rates is an issue. They've seen a 34% decrease in property crimes from 13 to 16. What's also interesting is our citizen survey results have not changed in people's perceptions of property crimes being an issue. So it'll be interesting to see how some of these things start to trip into other indicators as we move forward. And we've got our next citizen survey scheduled for fall of this year. Inadequate emergency notification system. We've also got some, while we haven't made specific strides in this, we've got enhanced outreach via our social media as our following grows. We've also got with our new website an emergency alert option that we are just learning about kind of all the capabilities we have with that and how we could perhaps use that for something for the police department. Radio infrastructure, again, moving that to IS, looking at inadequate and unsecured parking. That'll definitely be something that'll be included in the unsafe and vulnerable PD facility issue that we continue to look at, which follows directly, which makes good sense. Under investigations, and I think as this ties in with some of the staffing changes that have been made, there were, in 2012, 22 investigations completed with 0 cases referred for prosecution. With some of the adjustments they've made in 17, there were 126 investigations completed and 8 cases referred for prosecution. And this was within that internet crimes investigation detective position that we went with. So it's really interesting to see those kinds of numbers and how it really makes an impact. And we'll look forward to being able to look at that more often. I think we got radio. Some of the things that they've done in-house, for instance, training and professional development, they are adjusting, or they created a mentoring program for their newly promoted corporals that are being adjusted into a different position. And they've completed that and implemented it, and we'll look forward to seeing how that works out for them and how they can move forward with that. This will be the biggies. So Public Works, and this is a tricky table because, again, this is Public Works looking at their tasks, actions, and strategies, which are supposed to be annual tasks, but for Public Works, some of these are on a 20-year timeline. So what we've done is take a look at the percentage complete, the percentage in progress, and given it a rough estimate of progress, and I do mean rough. So some of these things you'll see, though, you can get very far along in them. Others are, you can tell, some of the things that are really long-term projects. So it's just, like I said, that percentage is just a rough estimate of things completed to date and things still on the books, knowing full well that these are big projects. I think we hit the big ones in the major challenge areas, and I'm sure Les will be happy to answer any questions, and I'd be happy to pull out the report he did to try to help answer questions too. So go to the source for that one. They do have the most issues per any department. They also have the most divisions and some of those types of things as well. So, and that is a somewhat brief overview of the strategic plan. It's not brief at all. I'm sorry.
I do have a question on that, Public Works, under inadequate codes and ordinances that support city development, you got 0. Does that mean we have no codes and
No,
enforcement for?
that would mean
Oh,
some of the
kinda like-
projects that we planned on taking on to address that issue, we haven't gotten to at this point.
Okay.
They're
Just wanted to
pending,
make
I believe,
things
is the
cleared
code for
up.
that
I
one.
seen a 0 down there, and I was wondering what you were talking about.
We do have codes and stuff not in place, but being able to look at them and provide updates and suggestions to council are yet to come.
You chewed through a lot of stuff pretty quick, Jen. I mean, this could take several hours to really hammer through, Catherine.
Yeah, so just for clarification, I understand that the major challenge area started in 2014, 2015, and since that time, you've then started meeting with all these different departments. So I was with you, like at Farmers Market the other day when you went over all those things, and you've been at Fire. Where else are you? I guess I'm trying to, how many places are you?
So the big ones we have in progress right now are the Moscow Volunteer Fire Department, the Arts Commission, Smart Transit. They've just been wrapping up a survey process, so we've been kind of on hold with them as they do some data collection. And then PEP, looking at if there's something we can use this strategic planning tool for PEP as well, would be the big 4 we're looking at that have said, hey, do you mind letting us borrow that?
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you.
Brandy, I had a question, Jim, then I'll come back to you.
The survey that went out about the recycling center, can you just tell me a little bit about the timeline for that?
Yeah,
the
so
survey?
the survey went out I think about 2 weeks ago. We usually leave those open for about 3 to 4 weeks, which times very well. It got out a couple weeks later than we thought, that I anticipated, but our interns that are doing the data collection on that right now are in finals. So beginning next week, after finals, Trevor and Shaky will be back and doing the data entry for that survey so that we can begin looking at, it's yet not just recycling, but sanitation, transfer station, all our different services and locations that relate to that.
And how many of those went out?
We did the same process as we do our citizen survey or commission survey. So we sent 1,200, and we're hoping for about 30, give or take, 30% of those to be returned. If I may, it's a random
Explain.
sample of the population. So we just pick addresses at random. We only send 1,200 out of the entire, I think there's 14,000 addresses in the city of Moscow. So you may not get a sanitation survey, but maybe you'll get a citizen survey or a commission survey because we try to pick a different random sample every time.
And that's pretty typical on all of our surveys, those numbers, isn't that correct, Jen?
Exactly,
Whatever the
yeah.
survey is.
Yeah, our goal is to get a statistically valid sample and return so that we can kind of intuitively look at what everybody in the community may have an
Jim, you
opinion
had
on.
a,
Yeah, back when we established all these major challenge areas in 14, 15, some of these we've made a lot of progress on, and like, for instance, the economic development piece, we have Partnership for Economic Prosperity is up and running now, so that was basically done, and maybe we should maybe relook at these and find out what our major challenge areas are now. Because some of them have been addressed and are no longer at the top of the heap, and something else should move up.
If I may.
Yeah.
That is the next step. Our goal was to bring you an annual report, because we've had about 2 years to get comfortable with this process. And soon those reports will come more often, either semi-annually or quarterly even. But the idea is that we approach it in a strategic fashion. So in preparation for next year's budget, not 2019, but 2020, we will begin the process in the fall to start looking at the strategic plan, determine if the council has changes, new challenge areas, celebrate the successes that we've had, look at the things that haven't had any progress, and determine is it because we just don't have the capacity to do it right now, or is it because the interest has changed? Some things maybe have fallen off. So we'll revisit that hopefully come fall and be prepared to integrate any of those changes in the FY 2020 budget.
Gary
But
and
it's
I-
intended to be a long-term
Yeah,
process.
Gary and I talked about this, I don't know, probably 6 or 8 weeks ago, because I thought, Jim, it would be important, because we've had new counselors come on since the first of the year, to sit down, have a meeting, go through exactly what you're saying, so we can all get regrouped. And I think that gives everybody just a little bit better idea what's going on, what we've accomplished, so on and so forth. So you're thinking this fall, Gary, is that what
Yeah.
you said?
If I can add to that too, the difference between the goal setting and a strategic plan is that goals are typically 1 or 2 years in the making, and a strategic plan takes a lot longer. But you have to understand that it isn't just the things within the strategic plan that folks are dealing with. The reason we do the operational overviews is so you can look at what people do every day in their jobs. Strategically beyond that, long-range goals are in addition to what they do every day in their jobs. Now, in the middle of that, you come up with other things that, say, council wants to have done, projects that need to be done. So all of that has to work together, so you stay on that long-range path, but you're picking up projects as they come up, and you're still doing your day-to-day job.
Been chipping away.
Exactly.
Brand, you got a question?
I do. Do you want to go?
I just-
Catherine, I'm
yeah,
sorry.
It's okay, you're left-handed, so I know it's intended to go that way. That's okay, I just wanted to ask, is this available on the website under you, Assistant City Supervisor, since you're doing the work for it, or how would, if somebody wanted to find it?
So we have all of our strategic planning documents on the administration webpage of the website. I have not uploaded the update yet. So we have our executive summary, and then we have our full plan. And as Gary mentioned, we do have the major challenge areas for our externals. I think we have 22. For our internals, we have 12. But for all of the departments all told, there's more than 100. So those major challenge areas are really the ones the council has said, okay, these are the highest priority. But at those other levels, we're still, as a staff level and at the department level, saying, okay, these are still things that we're going to need to keep doing so that we can then continue to address those higher priorities and keep the operations going. And so I appreciate Gary's comments on that as well.
Well, and something will change, something quickly too, is out of the blue, if we get a grant for something that comes along, may get chewed through in the middle of the pack or 2/3 down the pack, that can be addressed, and that makes sense too. Yeah, Brandy?
The website, I know, I think I asked Lori about this a while ago, it takes time to upload, get the older records on there, and it's been something that you've been gradually working on. How far back are you now?
For
What year? For if someone were to do a search for, a meeting in the past? I mean, how far back is that available on our new website?
For agendas and minutes, I would have to defer to the clerk because I'm not quite sure. I know we've gotten a couple years, but
2008.
thank you.
2008,
Thank you.
so making progress. Yes. And one other follow-up question about the sanitation issue. So beyond the survey that's gone out, there will be, my understanding, opportunities at a later date for input from people that maybe didn't get that survey, correct?
Yeah, we're looking at a focus group opportunity towards the end of May or beginning of June. And then also, as the sanitation master plan comes together, just like we have with our other master plans, having a public input process on the draft plan as we get things compiled. So more to come on that. We also have a steering committee that's been extremely helpful in putting together the survey and looking at the types of questions that we should be asking. And we've had a couple of those folks say they'll participate in our focus group interviews as well. So it's nice to have kind of that well-rounded perception as we move into that.
One more.
Okay, Brad.
The highway entrance issue I see has been kind of moved over. So we just kind of, what's the status with that?
I can comment on that.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary.
It was done about 3 years ago. Council approved a plan. That plan was pretty extensive. It involved hiring some part-time people to go out and do some landscaping along the entrances and that sort of thing. We ended up hiring the people. They maintain those areas. We have some folks, they call them the red shirts from Orofino, who come up and do some initial weed eating and that sort of thing, but it's maintained with those people. There are also some rights-of-way issues, some private property issues, and we have just not, that hasn't been a high enough priority to move it forward. But it is still viable. It's just, we're having a tough time getting some sideboards on it. So we'll work on it again this summer and see if we can come forward with a more, I guess, accurate plan.
Well, with that being said, even our north entrance, we found out that was on somebody's property that we put
Yeah.
up years and years ago, so we worked through that process to get that fixed, so. Okay. Yeah, did you?
Yeah, maybe this is a question for you, Jen, or for you, Les. I'm looking at the 50% completion for declining city water supply. I'm just wondering what went into that number and what the city staff sees as next steps.
Right. And I would say 50% isn't an indication of completion. It's just a gauge of the number of actions that we have in place that we're working through to get there. So let Les speak to that. I want to give that caveat.
Yeah, the percentage, is really just reflective of, the tasks that we had identified to help us take the first steps, if you will. The large part of the water supply issue is really being addressed through PBAC, Blue Space and Aquifer Committee, and we are working with them, council and staff, with respect to that. And one of the major tasks that they've been undergoing lately and are ready to go out to public comment upon is identifying 4 alternative approaches to addressing long-term sustainable supply within the basin. And multiple projects, different types within those. That's most likely going to be the avenue that eventually leads the city to long-term water supply that's different than what we currently do. And so the tasks that we've identified really kind of revolve around the edges of that, trying to support that, trying to figure out ways that we can do things to better use what we have, identify potential solutions, carry those solutions, which we've developed previously, into PBAC's discussions. So, yeah, there's a long ways to go
Yeah.
in the overall picture.
Okay.
No further questions. Thank
Good report, good presentation,
Thank
Jen. Look forward to the fall meeting that we'll have where we get together and have a workshop on our stuff.
Yeah, we'll come forward with a schedule
Yeah.
that lays out try to do the the budget calendar a little earlier, but we'd really like to be able to take any revisions to the strategic plan into the budget process, which we begin in late February.
Okay. That ends our regular meeting with the exception of reports. We're going to talk about those. And I'm going to start to my right. Catherine, with you.
So in our document was the Moscow Farmers Market points that they actually discuss in their strategic planning. So all that's in there. So I won't go any further into that since Jen did such a fine job with all that. But the other things that they covered that were really important, hopefully everybody was able to attend the first market. That was this Saturday.
I was there.
Yeah, and then the committee talked about, they're doing a business survey to all the Latah County businesses at the end of the market. And they have two particular areas, which is partnering and economic impact. And they talked about going down and the commission themselves doing the survey. So it wouldn't be like a Survey Monkey thing. I think they were going to actually do some FaceTime with those people. And then Dulcie came, Kirsting from the Latah County Historical Society, and she presented on the oral history project. They want to compile an oral history of the market. And so that's beginning to take some shape. And then Daniel Stewart, the market manager, reported on dogs at the market. And correct me on that one, but there were 350 incidences last market year that they had to redirect people with dogs and trying to educate people about service dogs. And then there were 50 incidences to deal with smoking and help educate people about smoking and where you can smoke during the market. So just a little snippet of some of the things that the, the staff deals with when they're downtown during the market days. That's it.
Okay, Art?
Yeah, two items. One, Parks and Rec Commission met a week or so ago. Had a lot of discussion about upcoming summer events, all of the classes, projects, activities that Parks and Rec put on each summer. But interestingly, found out that Moscow's maintaining some of Lena Whitmore's areas around playground equipment that was owned by Moscow but is now aging out, and then it turns out that Moscow doesn't actually own the land anyway. And so they're looking to have a little bit of a renegotiation with the school district about who's maintaining what. So that was an interesting little item, but it was, oh yeah, and there was some considerable talk about trying to find other areas for off-leash dog parks beyond the current two that we have at the Humane Society and then out at the Mountain View Park. And they were looking at perhaps the Palouse River Drive Park areas in cyclocrossing areas, or possibly even the Lola Clyde area, but that was rapidly shot down. So Palouse Knowledge Corridor is currently well involved with the Be the Entrepreneur Boot Camp planning, and that will occur the 11 to the 14 of June this year at the Idaho Commons, the IREC, and at the Schweitzer Engineering Lab Center. So the planning is going forward with that, and they're getting set up for another round of Be the Entrepreneur Boot Camp. And also, I'll leave this one to you, but we had a meeting with the Association of Idaho Cities.
Yep.
And since you're the representative for that area, I'm going to leave that one to you.
If you are, Dan.
Yeah, so planning and zoning met last Wednesday. Their two big topics for discussion were plan unit development, PUD, base identities, or I'm sorry, densities for zoning districts. And so the big discussion for that was that not all zoning districts have them, but not all zoning districts have residential or make sense for PUDs. And so there was, I think, further discussion on that. And then rural lot access requirements. So right now it's 150 feet, which doesn't make a lot of sense for how those are laid out currently. And so again, no decision was made, but just some discussion on that. And then the big topic at the Fair and Affordable Housing Commission was that they held their first housing fair. And so we talked about how to make that more successful moving forward. They were happy with how many vendors came, but would have liked to see more turnout from the public. And so they had folks, everyone from realtors to, I don't think they had any property management folks and would like to, but vendors like Moscow Building Supply too. So if you're renting, first-time buyer, you can have your questions answered. So I think they're planning on doing it again and looking at how to, I think, have some more planning time.
Okay. Jim.
Okay, I'll talk about Palouse Basin Aquifer Committee to feed into Ann's question about that and what Les said. The last meeting, there was more discussion about the ongoing research project. It's a 2-year project to help define how much water's in the ground, what the aquifer actually contains. That's underway right now, and it'll take them a couple years to try and define the resource a little better so we know what we're working with, how much water do we have under there, because that's difficult to say. And also, at the same time, there's research going on, data collection on the North Fork of the Palouse River to find out how much turbidity is in the water and therefore how much treatment it would take to make that water usable, and therefore help us come up with what the cost might be for some marginal cost data on what we should be charging for water, because that might be the likely next sustainable source. So those things are going on in order for us to decide where we're going with water in the future. Also, the Human Rights Commission met a couple weeks ago, and the high school member of that commission, Ari Carter, is very active, and he organized the Walk for Life march up to Friendship Square and the school walkout, and so it's great to have young people involved and very involved in their community in that way. Also, they sponsored the food chain film that was shown at the Kenworthy, that so people could see how farm worker treatment affects your food supply and how important that is going forward. And the only other thing I attended was the Latah Trail Foundation fundraiser dinner, and I want to thank Margaret Dibble. I don't think she's here anymore, but she did a huge amount of work doing that, and the trail continues to get better, and I encourage everybody to ride it all the way as far as it goes down to almost Kendrick, and hopefully there within the next couple of years. That's all I have.
Okay. Randy?
Let's see, historic preservation. The very cool thing, they had their 1912 interpreted signage on a big board, and we walked over. They're selecting a location now, so the whole commission, we walked over there and tried the location that Jenny from the Heart of the Arts was hoping for, and David came along with us to give any feedback of any issues that he saw. So finalizing the location for that should be up soon, and it looks really great. A little more discussion about the upcoming Orchid Awards and the Fort Russell expansion celebration, and they're looking into getting a speaker for that. The University of Idaho, some representatives from there will be meeting with probably Wendy McClure from Historic Preservation in June. They're going to have some discussions to see if the Moscow's Historic Preservation Commission can kind of assist the university if they decide to pursue that, since they've already been through it here for the city. That's it for historic preservation. The Sustainable Environment Commission has made some progress, well, in conjunction with Parks and Rec. Parks and Rec has identified a test park, the Otness Park, to trial a pesticide-free, at least a portion of that park, which would be a no spray zone. So that's something that SEC has been working with Dwight for quite a while, so they're pretty excited about that. The Citizens for Climate Lobby have come to the SEC a few times with some presentations and updates, and they're working on the CCL is working on some possible letters and resolutions, not just here, but also over in Pullman. That's going to be going to their council over there. So I'm sure they will keep us apprised of how that goes. Went to a bike coalition meeting on campus that was run by Rebecca Couch from Parking Services, and she had a student that really did a presentation. Les was there, and Philip Cook from the Transportation Commission, and I think at this point it seemed that the university's needing to make a decision of if they want to go forward with a type of a assessment process from an outside entity, the Bicycle Friendly America, I suppose, is that right? That can grade the university on a level of platinum, bronze, silver, gold, and so Les had some input from the city going through similar and continuing to try to advance our rating at the city level. So I think we'll many people interested in helping and supporting the university if they decide that that's something they want to try to improve on campus. So that's what I've got.
Okay, very good. For me, I had an airport board meeting on the 25th of April, talked about a lot of different things. And what that led into was on May the 4th, we made a trip to Seattle. And when I say me, myself, the mayor from Pullman, our airport executive director, Tony Bean, our chamber director, Jenny Ford, as well as Dan Ewart from the University of Idaho, to talk to and do a presentation for Alaska, because Alaska Air is pulling out of Lewiston in August to see what kind of possibilities for us to get a flight from here to Boise. And we didn't get a yes, but we didn't get a no. But we had a lot of information, a lot of statistics to give them. And so it was a really, I think, a well-received report and meeting that we had with them. So we'll see how that goes. On May the 1st, we had our District Association Idaho Cities here, as Art had said. There was Art and Ann, myself, Brandy, Gina was there, as well as Mia and Lori.
I came to the afternoon.
Oh, you were in the afternoon portion?
Mm-hmm. No, the thing where the ITD was here, that wasn't the same.
Oh, this is AIC. This was all day.
I'm sorry, I missed AIC.
Anyway, and of course we got our summer annual convention coming up in June. That'll be something to be able to discuss later on. And then on May the 4th, we had the first farmers market of the year, and I was able to help ring the bell, and that was fun. Talked to a bunch of people down there, and it was really pretty doggone busy. And I've been down there the 1st of May, and it's been pretty nasty sometimes with the wind and rain and sleet and everything else. But this Saturday was pretty doggone nice for an opening season. And then just to say something, on May the 11th, Art had talked about Lena Whitmore, and that playground actually is the school's, not ours, is a park and rec thing, but they're having a fundraiser auction on May the 11th, and my understanding is that funds are going to go for playground equipment, so I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to go to that. Gary, do you have anything for us?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Just wanted to report on our annual Champs Awards that we had last week for the employees. Those are awards for great external, internal customer service, teamwork, and Rookie of the Year. So we had 4 winners there. We'll be bringing those names forward in a recognition ceremony, but also had service awards, which was very nice. And it was a good time was had by all. Everybody got together for some coffee and some snacks and that sort of thing. And we will be having this Friday at 11:30 at the Herc. We will be having our annual Public Service Recognition Week barbecue. So you're all invited to that. I will be grilling up some gourmet burgers and hot dogs and things like that, along with select other grill people. So it's a good chance to get poisoned by me. But it's usually a really good time. I know some of you have been there in the past, and it's been fun. Come out and mingle with the employees. Everybody gets together and has a good time. We also have commission training tomorrow night at 6:30 in this room. So we'll be talking to both the advisory and the quasi-judicial commissions, talking about roles of those commissioners, so on and so forth. We also have the annual commissioner awards that will also, the mayor will give those awards right at 6:30 as well. So if you, all the commissions have been informed, liaisons have been informed. Don't forget, we'll have some refreshments here, I hope, as well. But if you are within the sound of our voices and you're a city commissioner, please come tomorrow night. We will be videotaping it, so it will be available for those commissioners that are appointed throughout the years as well, or throughout the year as well. So that's kind of what's going on.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So entertained.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we will adjourn at 9:13. Thank you, everybody.